Hello guys and gals, welcome back to another episode of Haunted Gaming. This time I'm going to cover a creepypasta called Touhou 14. This creepypasta begins with the player telling us that he or she always prided themselves on two things, being fearless and amazing at video games. Any game the player owned was completed on the hardest difficulty. The player also prided themselves on their Touhou achievements as well. The player tells us that the Touhou games are vertical shooters where you dodge bullets while firing at the enemies, through 7 levels of increasing difficulty, and throughout the whole saga for the game there exists 20 total games in the series. The player claims to have beaten all these games, even the ones on the PC-98, on the hardest difficulties available. The player was excited upon the discovery of the demo for the latest game called Touhou 14, which was revealed by a friend. The player downloaded the game through the file sharing service RapidShare. The player, however, didn't see any reaction by the Touhou community, which should have raised some red flags. There was no one basically crying out or discovering this demo, rather. If it weren't for the player's thick skull, as he or she claims, this would have raised some red flags. After about an hour and a half, the game finished downloading and installing, and the time turned out to be 10 p.m. The player had college in the morning and decided to go to sleep rather than stay up and play the game. Smart move. The player woke up from a rather uncomfortable night. It was still somewhat dark outside, and the player checked the time. It was 4:44 a.m. The player tried to go to sleep but couldn't, and eventually just got out of bed. It was 5:59 a.m. and the player was getting ready. As he or she was getting ready, the player spotted a blinking blue light off of his or her laptop. The player was sure he or she turned the system off last night, but on closer inspection it seemed that the player didn't actually switch it off. The player decided to relax until their bus arrived for college at 6:30, and this gave the player a chance to try the new Touhou game they downloaded last night. The player executed the game, and in a few seconds the title screen was up, similar to the title screen of 10 Desires with no audio whatsoever. The player thought this may have been an issue in patching, which removed the sound file. The player claimed to have this problem with Perfect Cherry Blossom. Starting up a new game, however, the player found some new playable characters: Flandre, Nue, Komachi, Utsuho. The player chose their favorite character, Nue, and began the game. The player hit the Z button, which we believe to be the confirm button. The game simply produced a loud screech. No matter which character was picked, the game simply wouldn't work, except for Komachi. There was no music. When the player chose Komachi, the game began. The vibrant graphics appeared dull. This didn't really matter to the player since this phenomenon also did occur through many FPS games as well on the system that this game was being played on. There were no bullets to dodge, no fairies, no mid-boss. All that existed were small cloud-like enemies. As if whenever the player attacked them, they just began to flee, leaving a black box in their position instead of point boxes or power-ups. As the player collected these, some strange things happened. Around the 10th box, the screen faded to black, and the game produced the loudest static noise. The player was startled and decided to forcibly switch off the laptop. The timer at 6:25, and it was time to head on over to college. Later that day, the player returned home and decided to fire up Touhou 14 again, hoping that the game would be more playable than before. This time, music was heard on the title screen, and there wasn't any off music this time. In fact, several game themes played in unison. The game wouldn't be controlled. It appeared as if it were in a demo mode of sorts. The next shocking thing was when the boss had finally showed up. It was a stressed-looking Shiki that appeared, warning Komachi to turn back. It wasn't too surprising to the player since there weren't any aforementioned incidents, and Komachi did have a job to do according to the player. Then the game launched Komachi towards her, and Komachi's scythe cleaved the boss in half. The player sat there dumbfounded, trying to comprehend what the hell just happened. As the blood seeped from the half pixels, it spread all over the screen until the background was completely obscured by red. The game then allowed control, and the player was thrown into level 2. The player was confronted by some fairies. Again, they dropped black boxes like before, but this time there wasn't a static sound. The setting resembled the flowing lava from the subterranean animism stage 6. At this point, an irritated and fearful Rin appeared and began warning Komachi that to progress further would be a great danger. The computer took away Komachi's control, and she was launched into the Kasha, slicing Rin's head off. The player trembled upon seeing a horrific screen which appeared just long enough for the player to print screen the image and post it into an image editing program. According to the player, the photo looked to be of a young cosplayer, dressed as a Flandre. It looked violent, depicting impalement and broken bones sticking out of the right arm. Bile rose from the player's throat after realizing what this game truly was. The player deleted this image and tried to exit the game. Alt F4 wouldn't work, and the process wasn't appearing in the task manager. The player was tasked with just finishing this game to get it over with. Why the player did not turn off the system, I don't know. The format remained the same for 5 more horrible levels, characters being slaughtered. As for the game, it continued these split-second frames of gruesome Touhou cosplayers, which would appear and would last longer in duration. All of them appeared lifeless and dismembered, intestines removed and wrapped around the necks, and clothes torn open. The end of the game finally came up with an image of a Hina cosplayer. No credits came, only the words, "and special thanks to you." The player still has not fully processed this, but the player certainly doesn't pride themselves on being fearless anymore. Anything red makes them vomit, Touhou won't even be looked at anymore without fainting, and the player dreams about these Touhou cosplayers, sort of like nightmares. The police took away this laptop as well to search for this file, but the laptop was completely destroyed. Apparently the motherboard was just fried. The download link was gone, and the player is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. All the player knows now is that they see those dead faces, and they'll continue to do so until the day they die. Okay, so this is Touhou 14. This was requested quite a lot, and after finally checking it out, it's not horrible, but at the same time, I also wonder why it was readily requested as well. I mean, yeah, we get good creepypastas and we get bad creepypastas, and, you know, Touhou 14 is definitely not in the good creepypasta section. It's more into the creepypasta section. Now, as far as cliches go, they're pretty noticeable, but, you know, I guess they really weren't thrown in there, it seems at least, but I won't deny that they did make my face come awfully close to my palm. I mean, they really did take me out of the experience, but some of them, you know, some of them were kind of meant to be in there. I mean, it's explained, and the reaction from the player to all this phenomena is quite realistic as well. Nothing incredibly over the top until, you know, we get way into the ending. The creepypasta starts off normally. We've seen this download link stuff before, and we can really let it slide. It's not even an issue worth mentioning, really. I mean, you gotta get the game from somewhere, right? And this seems quite legit. In the beginning, we get some background on the player and the obtaining of this game. Then we move on to the rest, where the game essentially just throws some screeching sounds and then again resorts to killing other characters. Now bear in mind, I've never played Touhou, and I don't know anything about the lore. I can get by on other games like Sonic with the basic information that I have, but here I'm completely oblivious to the characters and environments of the game. This creepypasta essentially went into a kill fest with these numerous in-game characters, and the only other thing that really mattered or interested me was the cosplay pictures. In a sense, it reminded me somewhat of LSD Dream Emulator in a sense, but over here, you know, there's really no context to these photos. I mean, why do they appear? Do they have some overarching plot? I feel as though if this was fleshed out more, the creepypasta would be a lot more scarier than what it is now. See, the stuff only works when it has a meaning, not if you throw it in and the only effect it really has is mentally scarring the player at the end. Again, another thing that I really did, another thing that I was interested in was the, you know, fairies, I guess, too, where they would constantly evade your attacks and, dropping these black boxes. I wish that was also fleshed out, too, because that could have been really interesting as well. Now, moving on to the mental scarring of the player, rather. I don't know, I guess the ending was also sort of weird. I mean, you shit your pants and vomit from seeing red, Touhou makes you faint, and you have post-traumatic stress disorder. It feels quite unexplained, almost as if the author was just running out of space and decided to end it in a couple of sentences. I'd much rather this creepypasta relate itself to some real-world events, hell, maybe start becoming more and more morbid as time passes on and the player keeps playing the game more and more, telling a tale in a cryptic fashion the more and more the player plays. Revealing a dark revelation or something along those lines would have been much better in my opinion, but that was Touhou 14. It's a pretty well-requested creepypasta that I've finally gotten to. Is it good? Not really. I mean, it's got its moments, and it does things right, to be honest, but ultimately it doesn't really have much substance, and without that substance, it's not really a creepypasta. I mean, what would you rate this, and what would you change to make it better? This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming, and if you like what you saw, then like, comment, and subscribe. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.